The air inside the White House Situation Room this afternoon is thick with a clinical suffocating tension, the kind that only follows a perceived total victory. Less than 72 hours have passed since Operation Epic Fury successfully eliminated the top tier of the Iranian leadership. On the glowing tactical displays, the mission looks like a masterpiece of American precision. Yet as the giant screens flicker with the heat signatures of rising smoke and low-flying drone swarms across the Persian Gulf, a localized crisis of logic has begun to set in among the world's most powerful men. It was in this environment that President Trump turned to the semicircle of his most senior advisors, the architects of the strike, the analysts of the CIA, and the top brass of the Pentagon, and asked a question that will likely define the coming decade of military history. Who do we call to stop this? It was a quintessentially Trumpian inquiry, direct transactional, and focused entirely on the bottom line. He wasn't asking for a briefing on the Iranian military's chain of command, nor was he seeking a philosophical debate on the constitutional succession of the Islamic Republic. He was asking for a phone number. He wanted a name, an intermediary, a back channel, a who that could be incentivized, threatened, or negotiated with to ground the drones and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. According to those briefed on the conversation, the question produced a silence that lasted several seconds, a duration that in the high-velocity world of global crisis management feels like an eternity. This silence was not the result of a lack of information. It wasn't because the National Security Agency had lost its eyes, or because the State Department's translators were busy. It was a strategic silence. It was the sound of America's entire intelligence apparatus simultaneously realizing that the fundamental premise of decapitation strikes the idea that killing the head kills the body had been turned on its head. The answer they are all grappling with this afternoon is the most terrifying one possible in geopolitics. There is no one to call. Not because Iran is in a state of chaotic anarchy, and not because the country lacks a formal government. Rather, it is because the man the United States killed on Saturday morning had spent the final months of his life ensuring that his death could never be used as a lever to stop the machine he had set in motion. In the eyes of the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps units currently firing at American bases and Gulf energy infrastructure, the supreme leader isn't a living person sitting in a bunker in Tehran. He is a set of pre-distributed, pre-authorized instructions that cannot be rescinded by any living official. The drones are flying, the tankers are burning, the missiles are launching, but they aren't doing so on the orders of a surviving general or a nervous provisional council. They are flying on the orders of a ghost. The United States has successfully removed the head of the Iranian state, only to find that the body is a decentralized, automated organism designed specifically to thrive in the absence of a central command. As the silence in the Situation Room deepened this afternoon, the strategic reality became hauntingly clear. You cannot negotiate with a dead man, and you cannot countermand an order that has already been institutionalized into the DNA of every missile battery from Bandar Abbas to the outskirts of Mashhad. The phone number Trump is looking for doesn't exist because the only man who had the authority to pick up the phone was the one America just sent to the grave. The silence of the advisors wasn't a lack of data. It was the realization that the war is now running on autopilot, and the off switch was buried with the leadership. The silence in the Situation Room was eventually broken not by a breakthrough in diplomacy, but by a briefing paper from the European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR, that began circulating among the National Security Council staff this afternoon. The document's title was clinical, but its contents were devastating. The post-decapitation resilience of the IRGC, a decentralized dead hand. It provided the technical blueprint for the nightmare currently unfolding across the Persian Gulf, a nightmare that the late Supreme Leader had spent his final 9 months meticulously constructing. To understand why the missiles keep flying while the Iranian leadership lies in ruins, one must understand a concept from the height of the Cold War, the dead hand. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union developed a system known as perimeter. It was a fail-safe designed to guarantee a nuclear retaliatory strike, even if the entire Soviet command structure was vaporized in a first-strike decapitation. It was an automated semi-robotic system that removed the human element from the trigger. It was considered the most dangerous weapon ever conceived because it replaced the logic of deterrence with the cold certainty of mutual destruction. What the world is witnessing this afternoon is Iran's conventional asymmetric version of that very logic. Between the ceasefire of June 2025 and the strikes of this past weekend, Iran underwent a radical, quiet transformation. Under the direct supervision of the man America just killed, Tehran shifted its entire military doctrine. They moved away from a defensive containment model, which relied on a central command, giving orders in real time, to an explicitly offensive, asymmetric posture. This wasn't a desperate improvisation or a reaction to the current strikes. It was a formal, institutionalized redesign of the state's capacity to wage war. The ghost in the machine is a decentralized system of pre-authorization. According to intelligence assessments now reaching the president's desk, the IRGC Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been restructured into hundreds of independent, highly mobile units. Each unit, whether it controls a drone swarm in the mountains of Bushehr or a ballistic missile battery in the tunnels of Hormozgan, is operating on what the ECFR calls standing orders issued post-mortem. Before the first American bomb fell, these units had already received their targets. They had been given their operational windows. Most importantly, they had been given the legal and religious authorization to fire without further instruction. In the 9 months leading up to this conflict, this doctrine was trained into every level of the Iranian military. It was written into the manuals and institutionalized in the bunkers. Every commander of every small unit knows exactly what his mission is to execute the plan until the plan is complete, regardless of who is still alive in Tehran. This is why the reports of tactical positioning from the new surviving Iranian leadership are so hollow. Even if the three-member council currently attempting to manage the state wanted to call for a ceasefire, they lack the institutional leverage to make it happen. The IRGC units firing at the embassy in Riyadh, the hotel towers in Dubai, and the energy infrastructure of the Gulf are not waiting for a signal from a provisional government. They are executing the final will of the supreme leader. In their eyes, any order to stop coming from a surviving politician is a betrayal of the dead man's divine instructions, instructions that were explicitly designed to function in the scenario where the leadership was killed. The brilliance of this system from a strategic standpoint is its sheer unresponsiveness. In modern warfare, the ODA loop, Observe, Orient, Decide Act, is the gold standard of combat. The side that can process information and give orders faster usually wins. But Iran has bypassed the ODA loop entirely. They are not observing, they are executing. They are not deciding. The decision was made months ago. This creates a strategic vacuum. Typically, military pressure is used to force a political leader to make a choice. You bomb a target to make the enemy's leader pick up the phone and offer a concession. But when the leader is dead and the soldiers are following a script that cannot be edited, the bombing becomes irrelevant. The IRGC units currently targeting Qatari LNG terminals and American bases in the region are operating on a timeline that doesn't care about the destruction of Tehran's ministries. The dead hand is currently squeezing the throat of the global energy market. Because the system is decentralized, there is no brain to kill. There are only hundreds of fingers, each moving independently, each following a preset rhythm of destruction. The realization dawning on Washington this afternoon is that the decapitation strike, the very act intended to end the threat, was in fact the final key that turned the lock. By killing the man who issued the orders, the United States killed the only person who could have rescinded them. The machine is now running on its own, and it was built specifically to ensure that it never has to stop. The ghost in the machine isn't merely a blind reflex. It is the execution of a new, terrifyingly coherent manual of war. As intelligence reports filter through the Pentagon this afternoon, the true scope of Iran's military evolution becomes visible. We are no longer dealing with the reactive gray zone provocations of the last decade. Since the regional conflict of June 2025, Tehran has undergone a fundamental metamorphosis, shifting its military DNA from a primarily defensive containment strategy to an explicitly offensive asymmetric posture. This isn't just a change in rhetoric, it is a change in architecture. In the 9 months between the 2025 ceasefire and the strikes that commenced this past weekend, the Iranian military didn't just lick its wounds, it rewrote its entire playbook. The source documents circulating among analysts this afternoon describe this as a process of formally embracing aggression. This distinction is critical. Iran is not improvising under the pressure of American bombs. They are not adapting on the fly or reacting in desperation. Every drone launch and every missile trajectory witnessed today was written down, institutionalized, and trained into every IRGC unit at every level of the command structure long before the first hangar was hit. The primary tools of this new doctrine are not the traditional hallmarks of a superpower, aircraft carriers, or stealth fighters, but the asymmetric Trinity drones, regional missiles, and energy coercion. In the eyes of the late Supreme Leader, the lesson of 2025 was that a defensive war is a losing war. To survive a confrontation with a technologically superior adversary like the United States or Israel, Iran decided it had to move the pain threshold away from its own borders and onto the doorsteps of its neighbors. This is why, as we watch the satellite feeds this afternoon, the targets are so specific and so devastatingly effective. Every IRGC unit firing at Gulf energy infrastructure at American bases in Qatar or at the shimmering glass hotel towers in Dubai is executing a pre-authorized operational plan. The strategy is surgical chaos. By targeting the literal engines of the global economy, the LNG terminals that heat European homes and the oil pipelines that fuel Asian factories, Iran is betting that the world's tolerance for high energy prices is lower than its own. Tolerance for American bombs. They are using missiles not as battlefield weapons but as economic levers. When a hotel in Dubai burns or an embassy compound in Riyadh is bracketed by drone strikes, the goal isn't tactical victory. It's the total collapse of the region's property markets, tourism, and investor confidence. There is a dark irony in the Situation Room this afternoon. Washington and its allies are betting on a decapitation that triggers internal collapse. Yet the very doctrine Iran is executing was designed specifically to prevent that. By decentralizing authority, they have ensured that every missile, battery, and drone team operates as its own mini-Tehran. They don't need to check in with a central command that might have been vaporized. Their orders are already in their pockets. The IRGC's new offensive posture is in many ways a form of asymmetric arson. They are setting fire to the neighborhood to force the fire department, the United States, to stop the fight. And because this doctrine was institutionalized over nearly a year of rigorous training, the units on the ground are operating with a level of discipline and autonomy that American intelligence clearly underestimated. None of them are waiting for an order from a surviving general. None of them need one. The order was issued months ago, and it remains the standing instruction for every soldier in the field: make the cost of this war unbearable for the world until the world forces America to blink. As the sun sets over the Persian Gulf this afternoon, it's becoming clear that Iran has successfully decoupled its military response from its political leadership. The drones and missiles are no longer just weapons. They are the autonomous extensions of a dead man's will, programmed to inflict maximum pain on a global scale until the off switch, which no longer exists, is found. As the sun begins to set over Washington this afternoon, the quiet panic in the Situation Room isn't coming from a lack of military success, but from the terrifying realization that Operation Epic Fury was too successful. The mission was built on a foundational doctrine of Western intelligence, the decapitation strategy. The logic was as old as Clausewitz. If you destroy the center of gravity, the entire structure collapses. The planners at the Pentagon and the CIA had bet everything on the idea that killing the supreme leader and his inner circle would trigger a predictable sequence of events. The IRGC would fragment into warring factions, the street would rise in a pro-Western revolution, and the new desperate leadership would crawl to the negotiating table. But as the reports flood in this afternoon, the decapitation fallacy is being laid bare. The expected internal fractures haven't appeared. There are no mass defections, no civil war between IRGC generals, and no jubilant protests in the squares of Tehran. Instead, the United States is facing a monolith that is arguably more dangerous now that it is headless. The fatal flaw in the American assessment was underestimating the late Supreme Leader's capacity for strategic foresight. He didn't just build bunkers. He built a culture of autonomous retaliation. He anticipated exactly what the United States would do, and he used his final 9 months to ensure that the IRGC's body would not only survive the loss of its head, but would actually become more aggressive in its absence. By killing the man who stood at the top of the pyramid, the U.S. didn't paralyze the system, it simply removed the only person who had the authority to pull the emergency brake. To understand the magnitude of this miscalculation, one only needs to look at the devastating comparison being whispered in the halls of the State Department this afternoon, the Afghanistan contrast. When America negotiated with the Taliban in 2020, the process worked because the Taliban leadership actually had authority over their fighters. The Doha Agreement held because the men who signed it could issue orders that were followed. America chose to keep those leaders alive specifically because you need someone to negotiate with when you want the war to end. In Iran, however, the U.S. took the opposite path. Operation Epic Fury was designed to leave no survivors among the high command. Every high-value target eliminated on Saturday morning was a potential bridge to a ceasefire. Every commander killed in the subsequent strikes over the last 5 days was a voice that could have eventually said stop. By being so efficient in its kill list, the United States has effectively bombed the negotiating table out of existence. This is the ultimate irony of the decapitation fallacy. You cannot have a regime change if there is no regime left to surrender. The three-member council, currently attempting to hold the Iranian state together, Rafi Pezeshkian and Mozinj, is trapped in a cage of the Americans' making. Even if they wanted to offer Trump a grand bargain this afternoon, they physically cannot. To publicly advocate for a ceasefire while the IRGC units are still executing, the Supreme Leader's divine standing orders would be seen as an act of ultimate betrayal. In the hyper-ideological world of the IRGC, the orders of a dead martyr carry more weight than the suggestions of a living politician. The strategic bet that animated every planning document of Operation Epic Fury, the bet that decapitation produces political transformation, has failed. Instead of a new, compliant government, America has produced a headless monster. It is a system designed to function in the dark, without central command, and without the need for political authorization. As President Trump tells the press that Iran wants to talk the reality on the ground, suggests something far more grim. The U.S. didn't just kill the leadership, it killed the very concept of a ceasefire. We are now in a war where the enemy's commanders consider themselves bound by the instructions of a ghost, and the American president is left holding a phone that no one on the other end has the authority to answer. The silver bullet of decapitation hasn't ended the war, it has merely ensured that it has no way to end. As the geopolitical clock ticks toward evening this afternoon, a jarring dissonance has emerged between the narrative being spun in Washington and the digital reality emanating from Tehran. This is the Larijani Paradox, a sophisticated exercise in strategic ambiguity that has left the White House chasing a diplomatic mirage while the Persian Gulf continues to burn. The fracture became public just hours ago. In an exclusive interview with The Atlantic, President Trump projected an aura of characteristic confidence, claiming that Iran's new post-strike leadership was desperate to talk. According to the president, the decapitation of the old guard had worked. The new men in charge were sending signals through back channels looking for a way out of the fire. They should have done it sooner, Trump remarked, framing the supposed overture as a total vindication of Operation Epic Fury. But almost simultaneously, a single post on X, formerly Twitter, shattered that narrative. It came from Ali Larijani, the man who has emerged this afternoon as the most powerful functioning authority within Iran's shattered security apparatus. A former advisor to the late Supreme Leader and now a central figure in the Survival Council, Larijani's message was 4 words long, written in English for maximum global impact. We will not negotiate. To the untrained eye, this looks like a government in chaos with the left hand not knowing what the right is doing. But according to the Soufan Center, one of the world's most respected geopolitical analysis organizations, this is not a contradiction. It is a feature of the design. In a briefing released to clients this afternoon, the Soufan Center warned that every Iranian signal about negotiations is tactical positioning. It is a deliberate dual-track strategy. The diplomatic track offers just enough hope to manage international pressure and stall further American escalations, while the military track, the dead hand, continues its operations, uninterrupted. The paradox runs deeper than mere deception. The Soufan Center's analysis suggests that even if the new leadership is sincere about wanting to talk, they simply do not have the institutional mandate to make it happen. The missiles flying across the Gulf this afternoon are not flying on anyone's current order. They are flying on orders issued by a man who is now dead. In the rigid, ideologically driven hierarchy of the IRGC, no living official, not even Larijani, and certainly not the civilian members of the council, has the religious or military authority to countermand a martyred supreme leader's standing instructions. This creates a terrifying reality for American diplomats. When Trump says he is talking to them, he is likely talking to men who have the title of leadership but none of the leverage. They are tactical bridge builders attempting to manage the period between supreme leaders, but they are powerless to stop the decentralized units currently targeting American bases and Qatari gas fields. Those units are not waiting for a signal from a politician in Tehran. They are executing a pre-written, pre-distributed plan that Larijani himself has publicly signaled his support for by promising to stab America in the heart. The Larijani Paradox reveals the true nature of the trap. By sending mixed signals, Iran is buying time. They are raising the pain threshold of the international community, hoping that as oil prices spike and Western embassies come under fire, the domestic political pressure on Trump will become greater than the pressure on Tehran to surrender. As the sun sets, the situation in the White House is becoming increasingly surreal. The president is boasting of a deal that is practical and easy to do, while the man in charge of Iran's security is telling the world that no such deal will ever happen. The American intelligence community is now forced to confront a haunting possibility that the talks Trump is so eager to tout are nothing more than a smokescreen designed to keep the U.S. engaged in a diplomatic dance while the dead hand of the late Supreme Leader continues to squeeze the global economy until it breaks. The signals say we might talk, but the missiles operating on the orders of a ghost say we will not stop. As the smoke thickens over the horizon of the Persian Gulf this afternoon, the true objective of the dead hand is becoming agonizingly clear. It is not a military victory in the conventional sense. It is a brutal, calculated exercise in testing the world's pain threshold. Iran's targeting of U.S. military bases and wide-scale state facilities across the Gulf, including the very arteries of the global energy trade, is already sending shockwaves through the international financial system. The images flickering across news terminals today are apocalyptic. In Dubai, the shimmering glass hotel towers that once symbolized the region's meteoric rise are bracketed by the black plumes of drone strikes. In Riyadh, the embassy compounds and government districts are under constant threat, but the most devastating blows are being struck against the infrastructure of global survival. Every Qatari LNG terminal shut down, every oil tanker set ablaze in the Strait of Hormuz, and every pipeline severed by a pre-programmed IRGC unit adds a zero to the global energy bill. Energy prices are not merely rising this afternoon. They are surging at a rate that threatens to decouple the global economy from its foundations. For the factories of East Asia that run on Middle Eastern crude, and for the families in Europe whose homes are heated by Qatari gas, the dead hand is no longer a theoretical military concept. It is a direct assault on their way of life. This is precisely what the late Supreme Leader intended. By making the economic and human pain so broadly distributed and so immediate, he has ensured that the pressure on President Trump to stop the war is becoming greater than the pressure on Iran to concede. The Gulf states, which provided the logistical backbone for Operation Epic Fury, now find themselves in a nightmare of their own making. They gave their airspace to Israeli jets and hosted the American bases from which the decapitation strikes were launched. Now they are facing the specific consequences Khamenei planned for them. Their air defense interceptors are depleting at an unsustainable rate. Their property markets, once the darlings of global investors, are in free fall as the safe haven myth of the Emirates evaporates. The tourists are gone, the capital is fleeing, and the shimmering cities of the future are being transformed into frontline combat zones. This is asymmetric arson on a planetary scale. Iran's broader strategy this afternoon appears to be a cold-blooded bet that they can endure more American bombs than the world can endure $200 a barrel oil. They are pushing the region's pain threshold to its absolute limit, hoping to drag the United States into a prolonged, expensive, and politically toxic confrontation that will eventually turn Trump's own domestic base against them. The irony is that this economic carnage is being overseen by commanders who do not need political authorization to keep firing. Their targets were selected months ago. Their authorization was issued by a man who is no longer alive to revoke it. While Trump tells the media that Iran wants to talk, the reality of the burning terminals and the soaring price of Brent crude tells a different story. Iran is not negotiating from a position of weakness. They are negotiating from a position of demonstrated resilience, using the global economy as a hostage. As the financial hubs of the Gulf face a collapse of confidence this afternoon, the strategic logic of the dead hand is achieving its goal. It has bypassed the American military's ability to win and moved the conflict into the one arena where the United States is most vulnerable, the stability of the global market. The message from the ghost in the machine is loud and clear. If the Iranian regime is to fall, it will take the global economy down with it. As dusk falls over the Potomac this afternoon, the atmosphere in the Situation Room has shifted from the frantic energy of crisis management to a grim historical clarity. The realization is no longer that a mistake was made, but that the United States has participated in a transformation of warfare for which there is no modern precedent. Military historians will likely study the events of this week for the next century, dissecting the strategic pre-authorization that has turned a decapitation strike into a permanent escalation. The legacy of the man America killed on Saturday morning is not the ruins of Tehran or the smoldering remains of the IRGC headquarters. His true legacy is the off button that no longer exists. In the final months of his life, the Supreme Leader didn't just prepare for his death. He weaponized it. He understood the American obsession with regime change and top-down command structures, and he used that understanding to build a trap. By shifting Iran to a decentralized post-mortem operational plan, he ensured that his assassination would act not as a conclusion to the conflict, but as its ultimate catalyst. This is the chilling lesson for the future of global security. When you kill everyone you can identify, you leave yourself with no one to talk to. The Afghanistan comparison haunts the State Department this afternoon because it highlights the fundamental failure of Operation Epic Fury. In every previous conflict, the goal of military pressure was to bring the enemy's leadership to the table. But in Iran, the U.S. has created a scenario where the table has been vaporized and the soldiers in the field are bound by a divine mandate that transcends the authority of any surviving politician. The dead hand system, conventional drone-based and decentralized, has fundamentally broken the logic of deterrence. Deterrence relies on the rational fear of a leader who wants to survive. But how do you deter a system that was specifically designed to function after its leadership has been destroyed? How do you negotiate with a drone swarm that is following a script written 6 months ago? As the president continues to tell the media that negotiations are possible, the reality on the ground remains unyielding. Every ceasefire attempt, every European back channel, and every Russian mediator has produced nothing but silence. This silence is the final victory of the late Supreme Leader. He designed this war to run without him, and this afternoon it is doing exactly that. The tragedy of the current moment is that the American strategic bet, the idea that decapitation produces political transformation, was based on a version of Iran that ceased to exist in June 2025. The Iran of today is a headless organism, structurally aggressive and institutionally incapable of surrender. The missiles currently bracketing the Gulf's energy infrastructure and the drones hovering over American bases are not flying on anyone's current order. They are flying on the momentum of a dead man's will. As night begins to settle over Washington, the answer to Trump's original question, who do we call, remains the same: no one. The authority to stop what is happening died on Saturday morning. The operational plan is running, the pain threshold is being tested, and the dead hand of the Islamic Republic is still squeezing. The war has no stop button because the man who built it ensured that he was the only one who could reach it, and then he made sure he wouldn't be around to hear the phone ring.